All right. Good evening. Tonight's shiur is always Lilu Nishmat Avi Marado Ber Meir Reuven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. Tonight's shiur is also Lilu Nishmat Meir Le Ben Reuven, my father-in-law, whose yahrzeit is this coming Shabbat. And tonight, of course, we're going to be speaking about the parsha of MiKaitz, which, interestingly enough, in the Torah, as I mentioned oftentimes on this, it's a single chapter in the Torah. Basically, it begins with, of course, Yosef interpreting Paro's dream and continues with Yosef meeting his brothers, but the famine starts and ultimately leaves us at the end with the brothers being brought back under a charge of stealing Yosef's goblet. So the part I wanted to focus on tonight really is the interaction between Yaakov and his sons at the beginning of the famine when he sends them down, and then when they return with the news that they've been accused of being spies. So that's really what I wanted to focus on today. So let's go right to the sources. Okay, so I'm going to basically just go through the parsha first and read it through a little bit, and then we're going to go through some of the parshanim on this. But basically, if we go back to the beginning of the story, the famine begins and it spreads from Egypt to Canaan and to the entire surrounding area. And we read that Yaakov Yaakov somehow finds out. Interestingly, it begins with Vayar, he sees, and then it says the next pasuk immediately says, Hinei Shamati, behold, I've heard. Parshanim find that interesting that he says it to see, but clearly, when it says Vayar Yaakov, when he sees, there's one medrash that says he had this glimpse of awareness from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because there's the medrash, of course, based on a similar medrash that says the entire period that Yosef and his father were separated until Yaakov found out that Yosef was actually alive, he did not have any nevuah because he was not in a mental state to receive nevuah. One has to be in a positive mental state to receive nevuah. And since Yaakov was not necessarily there because he was mourning over his son for all these years, it was no nevuah. So when it's Vayar Yaakov, he had a glimpse of nevuah, perhaps, or what Ruach HaKodesh is, I think, what Rashi says there. He says, sons, why are you hiding yourselves? I've heard that there is food available to be purchased in Egypt. Let's go down and buy some in order that we should live and not die. Interestingly enough, the Torah tells so 10 of the brothers of Yosef, which is what they're called. Interestingly here, they're called Yosef's brothers. 10 of them go down to purchase grain in Egypt. However, Binyamin, who is his full brother, he's called, interestingly enough, here they are called Achei Yosef, even though in contrast, we would have thought they would have been called something else. As we see in Pasuk Hey, they're referred to as Bnei Yisrael. However, Binyamin, Yosef's brother, is not sent. Because he said that Yaakov was concerned that something might happen to him. Now, I'm going to like to contrast what actually the Torah records about it, which is the right-hand column, how they relate this back to their father when they return. But I'm going to do it a little bit out of order. I just want to show it here because we're going to come back to the left-hand side. Right now, I want to focus on the right-hand side of the page, which is the Torah telling us what happened when the brothers go down to Egypt. So it says, they come amongst all the others who are coming to Egypt to buy food. Clearly, they are entering through some border control between Egypt and Canaan, together with many others from Canaan who are coming to buy food, because there was a famine in Canaan. And it tells Yosef, of course, is the shalit al haaretz. He's the ruler. Not only was he the ruler, he was the one who was in charge of supplying food for everyone. Yosef's brothers come down and they bow to him. Now, according to one opinion, this is the fulfillment of one of the dreams. Other parshanim say, no, this was not a fulfillment of any of the dreams for the very simple reason that Binyamin is not here. Binyamin is missing, so the dream is not yet fulfilled if only 10 of the brothers have bowed down to him. Yosef recognizes, sees his brothers and recognizes them. And he chooses to treat them in a negative way. He speaks harshly to them. Excuse me, David, can you please mute yourself?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. He speaks harshly to them. He says to them, from where are you coming? Where have you come? They say, hey, we're coming from Canaan and we're looking to buy food. Very straightforward answer. Now again, the Torah interestingly here repeats again, Yosef recognizes his brother. The Haim lo hikiruhu. They did not recognize him. The Parshanim talk a little bit about why was it that Yosef would have been more likely to recognize them than they recognize him. We'll get to that, Be'ez Hashem, a little bit later. By Yizkor Yosef, now the parsha tells that Yosef remembers the chalomot asher cholam lahem, that he dreamed about them. By Yomer alehem meraglim atem, says to them, "You are spies." The road batem. He accuses them of being spies, and the Medrash says that one of the reasons he accuses them of being spies is because, according to Midrash, the fact that it says Lishbor b'toch habayim, that he came amongst the purchasers, that each of the brothers entered Egypt through a different gate, a different method of entrance. They did not enter at the same time. They were not traveling together. They were traveling separately. Medrash brings all sorts of reasons for that. But when they arrive at Yosef, has them brought to the palace together. He uses that as a reason to accuse them of being spies, because normally if they were traveling as a group together to buy food, they would have stayed together, firstly for security reasons, secondly for companionship reasons. Clearly they wouldn't have split up unless, as Yosef accused them of, you must not be who you profess to be, you're trying to hide something, and perhaps you are trying to spy and you're representing some foreign power who's trying to learn everything they can about all the different ways of entering Egypt for conquest. So that's why he gives them that. Now, the other Parshanim say that the reason he accuses them of being spies is it because it limits their ability to ask anybody questions. Because once you've been accused of being a spy, if you now go around after you've bought your food and hang out in town and start asking lots of questions, that seems to validate the charge that you're spies. Why are you asking all these people all these different questions? And the Midrash wants to suggest that the reason they might have been asking questions was they wanted to find out perhaps somehow that whether Yosef had somehow made his way to Egypt, was somewhere to be found, and possibly bring him back home. One of the reasons the Parshanim suggested that in the beginning they're called Vayerdu Achei Yosef Asara, that they went down as Yosef's brothers to try to perhaps rescue them if they could find him, and he was in a place where they could ransom him. They felt they would do that. So again, all of these different midrashim are trying to fill in why was it that Yosef levies this specific charge against them. And what it was intended to do from Yosef's perspective. Obviously, as we see as the story plays out, Yosef wants them to bring Binyamin down. That seems to be his entire purpose here, is to get them into a position where they are compromised and they have to bring Binyamin down to prove their validity. That seems to be where Yosef wants to go. He says he wants to get them there. And he feels the best way to get them there is by charging them with being spies. They answer him, no, we're not spies. We just came to buy food. And then they give away the information. We are all the sons of one person. We are true people. Not only are we not acting as spies now, but we have never acted as spies. Yosef throws the charge at him. No, And then they amplify this. They say, there were 12 of us. But we're all the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. Behold, the youngest is with our father. He stayed behind. And one is no longer around. Now, they don't say he's died. They don't say where he is or what happened to him. They just say one is Einenu, is not with us any longer. Whatever it is, he moved on. He went a different direction. Whatever it is, they don't volunteer any information about him, but they do volunteer information about the youngest one, who is with their father. So Yosef obviously picks up on that, and immediately then says, Yosef, this is exactly as I've charged you with being spies. Now, how can you prove you're not spies? If you bring your younger brother here, why will that help prove you're not spies? Because if you got 10 people who are spies and they can convince somebody else to join them, obviously that's a pretty far-fetched thing. If you know you've been accused of being spies and you got to bring somebody to prove you're not a spy, not a lot of people are going to join you with that information. So clearly, that would help validate that is not a spy if you could find somebody who is willing to undertake that. Obviously, if you're a spy, you could find somebody else in your spy ring to do it. But again, we're going to see, presumably, that there's going to be enough information that they're going to be questioned about, that you would have to be somebody who knew enough about them. Now, Yosef's first ploy is, first suggestion is, send one of you, only one of you can go home, and he has to bring the youngest one back. But the rest of you, you're going to be kept in prison in order to test out whether it's true or not. And if that's not what you agree to, I swear by the life of Paro that you are spies. He puts them in prison for 3 days, or up to for 2 days and the third day. On the third day, he says to him, do this, and I'll change the plan. I'll change the story a little bit now that you've sat in prison and had time to think about it. Here's what I want you to do. If you really are true people and you're not spies, then I'm going to leave one of you. One of you is going to be left behind as a pledge that you will return. Yosef, or this Egyptian ruler, obviously the brothers don't know it's Yosef, is being very generous to them in that he's allowing them to bring food home. He says, my goal is not to kill you. He says, you can bring food home. However, you must bring your younger brother to me in order to validate that who you are and what you said you are, in order that you don't die. And that is what they agreed to do. However, before they leave, we have this very strange conversation right in front of Yosef. This conversation happens in the Torah records. They say to each other, one man says to his brother, we are responsible for our brother. Because we saw the agony within him, within his soul, when he pleaded with us, and we didn't listen to his pleas. That's why all of this is happening now. Now remember, they have no idea this is Yosef. They have no conception that this is Yosef they're standing in front of. And what are they saying? They're saying the only thing that we have to be guilty about, the only reason Hashem could be punishing us by having this capricious Egyptian insist that we have to bring Binyamin here, is not because we sold our brother, not because we wanted to kill him, but because we were indifferent to his pleading. Seems very strange that that's all they felt that they were guilty of. However, Reuven says, Reuven answers them, whoever this Ish El Achiv who were speaking, which generally Rashi takes as being, from the Medrash, as being code words for Shimon and Levi were discussing this. So one of them said to the other, And Reuven answered them, I told you, don't sin against the boy, referring to, of course, Yosef, and you didn't listen. And now also his blood is being, Hashem is paying us back for not just that we were indifferent, but also for what ultimately happened to him, for his whole, basically losing 20, whatever it is, years of his life, all of his life right now. However, obviously they did not know that Yosef was listening, because even though Yosef was in the room, there was also an interpreter in the room. And the interpreter, so therefore they felt that the Egyptian ruler did not understand whatever they were saying, the Hebrew they were speaking, because he needed an interpreter to understand them. However, clearly Yosef did understand everything that they had said. And as a result, he goes away from them and he cries. He returns to them and he speaks to them. And he takes Shimon and he binds Shimon in front of them to keep him as the, quote, security hostage to ensure that they will return. Now, behind the scenes, Yosef commands somebody, we don't know who, presumably his provisioning staff that is in charge of making sure that whoever buys food gets the right thing put in their baggage. To fill their sacks with grain. But he tells the guy, put their money back in first. And to also give them a little bit of provisions that will accompany them for their trip. And that is exactly what Yosef's staff did. They took the money that the brothers had brought to purchase food, put it right back in their sacks, put all the food on top of it, or perhaps the money was placed on top of the food rather than the food on top of the money. But in any case, each one had his food, the food that he came to buy, and the money that they were supposed to use to pay for it. The money is returned in their sack. They take all that they brought and that they've purchased, and they get ready to leave. They're on the way home. One of them opens their bag with their food in it. He wants to give his donkey a little bit to eat at the inn that they stopped at on the way home. And suddenly he sees, wait a minute, there's not grain in this sack. In addition to the grain in the sack, there's money in this sack. It was right at the top of the sack. So in other words, from this pasuk, it appears that Yosef told them, put the grain in and then put the money right on top of it. So they'll find it right away. And he tells his brothers, my God, my money, they gave us all the grain, but they didn't take the money. Money's back where it started. It's in my sack. And they panicked. They became frightened one to each other. What is God doing to us? Oh my, we're going to be in for great punishment when they find out that, hey, not only did we come and we're accused of being spies, but we took the food and we didn't pay for it. Could be in deep trouble here. Okay, so now I'm going to go back up to the top, and now we're going to hear, now that was exactly how the Torah described what happened to them in Egypt until they got home. Basically, they come before Yosef, there's a whole dialogue, they spend 3 days in prison, and now we're going to hear what they have to say to their father about telling what happened while they were in Egypt, and we're going to try to line it up with the way the Torah describes it. So that's the next few psukim. And even though it took us 12 psukim or 13 psukim to get to this, in very few psukim, they very quickly relate to their father what happened. By Yavol Yaakov Aviyam, they come back to Yaakov, their father, Arts of Canaan, to the land of Canaan. By Yagidu Lo, and they tell him, Kol HaKarot Otam, everything that happened to him, lay more, and this is what they told him. Okay, Diber Ho'ish Adonai Aretz Itanu Kashot. The man who was in charge of the land spoke very harshly to us. And he accused us basically of being spies. But no way, love, we responded to him, We are honest people. We're not spies. And then they said, we let out, we are 12 of us who are brothers, the sons of one father. One is not with us. And the youngest one is today with our father back home. Again, notice they've summarized this entire dialogue with Yosef into two short psukim, or three short psukim. He accused us of being spies. We told him we're not spies. We told him that there were 12 of us, and one of us is missing, and one of them is home. Now, even though, as I said, there was a dialogue back and forth with Yosef, they did not feel it was necessary to repeat the whole dialogue. They summarized it, and they captured the gist of it. The gist of it was basically there was a charge of spying, and they related there were 12 of them, and now we're going to see what they again. There's a whole long story here that happened. Vayomer Eleinu Ish Adonai Haaretz, and the man who was in charge of the land, again, they didn't give him a name, they didn't know who he was. If you want to prove that you are honest people, leave one of you behind. But I'm allowing you to go bring food to your families that are hungry. Fine, but go, and then you come back. However, you have to bring your younger brother to me. Then I will accept your statement that you're not spies, that you are honest people. I will give your brother back to you, meaning Shimon, the one who was being held hostage. And the land you will be able to conduct your business, and then you'll have free reign to do business in Egypt, because you will no longer be under the suspicion of being spies. Now, it's interesting. This is what they told their father. They don't make any mention of the 3 days in jail. They don't make any mention that original offer was everybody has to stay and only one's going to go, because that one at least we can understand, because that wasn't what happened. That was just Yosef's original challenge to them before he put them in prison for 3 days. So that perhaps we can understand. But some of the other omissions are clearly there for one reason and one reason only. Because had they told Yaakov all that had happened, it was less likely that he would have allowed Binyamin to go. Remember, their entire objective in this whole statement is to convince Yaakov that it's absolutely necessary for him to let Binyamin go with them the next trip to Egypt to buy food. If he doesn't, there isn't going to be a next trip to Egypt to buy food, and who knows what's going to happen to Shimon. So the brothers' whole capsulation of the story is focused on one goal, and that goal is getting Yaakov to agree to send Binyamin, because otherwise there's no future. They're going to all ultimately die of the famine if it lasts long enough and their food doesn't hold out, because they can't go back to Egypt to buy food without Binyamin. That seems to be the entire reason why they omit all of the things that could potentially give Yaakov more trepidation and less reason to allow Binyamin to go. Now, we read, by the way, that they don't mention any, obviously to their father, they don't mention no mention of the discussion that they had about why was Hashem punishing them. And then we find, of course, they all, what did they do? Now they all went to empty their bags to get the food out. And not only the one who opened his sack on the way had money in it, but all of them had their money back in their sacks. Obviously, we knew that before. They didn't know that before, because we heard Yosef command his staff to do it. So we knew that was the case. When they saw that all of their money had been for not just one, that it wasn't just a mistake made with one, they thought that this was now part of this conspiracy to accuse them of being spies, to keep them there and imprison all of them forever, period. Basically, that was what they were concerned about, that this money be turned in their sacks was part of the whole plot to frame them and ensure that they remained in Egypt and could not go home ultimately once they came back. So at the end, when they've seen the gold. Yaakov's heard this brief synopsis of what happened. Vayomer aleim Yaakov aviyam. Yaakov says to them, "Oh, see, shikaltem, you have caused me to lose my children. Yosef enenu. First, Yosef disappeared. Now Shimon enenu. Now Shimon's disappeared. That Binyamin tikachu. Now you want to take Binyamin away. Olai hayu fulana. All of these troubles they're all giving me lots of stress and lots of gray hair and lots of challenges in my life. I thought I had enough already. I thought it was time for me to relax a little bit." So we now have two different brothers are going to make suggestions. One is going to be made immediately and is going to be totally dismissed. The other is going to be made later on and ultimately accepted. And I want to try to understand what is the difference between the two. Why is one rejected outright, dismissed, and the other is accepted? So immediately Reuven, the oldest brother, now speaks up and says to his father, you can take my two sons and kill them, or two of my sons and kill them if I don't bring him back. To na'oto al yadi, give him into my hand, and I will be fully responsible for returning him to you. Yaakov's answer is an outright dismissal. No way. His brother, his only full brother, is dead. He's the only one left, who has my whole link to my beloved wife Rachel. He doesn't say that, but clearly that's the implied. When he says levado, he's the only one left. If some danger will happen to him on the way, you will cause me to go down to my grave. Now, we're going to leave the next 7 psukim out for 1 minute, and we're going to go to pasuk 8 of the next chapter, which happens a little bit later on in the story. And here we're going to have something here. Vayomer Yehuda el Yisrael Aviv. Yehuda speaks to, interestingly enough, when Reuven speaks, it just says El Aviv. When Yehuda speaks, it says El Yisrael Aviv. Don't know if there's any significance in that, but the way the Torah refers to it seems to be implying that there is perhaps a different relationship between Reuven and his father and Yehuda and his father. And clearly, as we see what happens, there seems to be a greater level of trust between Yehuda and Yaakov than there is between Reuven and Yaakov. What causes that? Why that is? Great question. Perhaps we'll get to that in the Mefarshim. So Yehuda says, "Shilcha hanar iti, send the boy with me. V'nakuma, we will get up and v'nelech, and let's go. V'nichyeh v'lo namud, we will live and not die. Gam anachnu, not only us, gam ata, you, gam tapeinu, also our whole families." Now, what does he say? Then he follows it up by, okay, don't just send him with me. Okay, big deal. Anybody can say send him with me. But then he follows up with a very, very strong positive statement. Anochi ervenu, I take responsibility for him. Ervenu is from the word arev, a co-signer of a loan. Somebody takes full responsibility to make sure that this will be taken care of. A guarantor, I guarantee it. Miyadi tivakshenu, you will seek him out from my hand. Imlo aviotiv elech avitzativ lefanecha. If I don't bring him back to you and make sure he's standing in front of you, I will have sinned to you all of my days. A very, very interesting statement. But again, why is that significantly different than Reuven's statement to Na'oto Yodi, give him into my hand, I will return him to you? Again, seems to be very, very similar statements, and yet, as I said, in one case, the request is totally dismissed, and in the other, we're going to see what happens. Had we not delayed, we could have already been there and back twice already. Had lots more food, had Shimon back, everything would have been hunky-dory if you'd have agreed right at the beginning to send Binyamin, but you didn't, so now we're where we are. So now we have to move forward. We can't look to the past and say, gee, why didn't you send Binyamin a while ago? But now we can send him. Now, the interesting thing is, I said, I skipped 7 psukim between these two, which are very, very significant psukim in the progression of the time between the time these two requests are made. They're not made back to back. They're not made at the same time. There's a lapse between the two, which again perhaps helps us understand why Yaakov realizes that he has to accept Yehuda's offer when he totally and completely dismissed Reuven's offer. What happened in between? Varav kaved baretz. The famine continued very, very harshly in the land. So Yaakov could have said, okay, hey, I figured let's see what happens. We've just brought a whole load of food. Maybe the famine will end. We won't have to go back. I don't have to worry about it. But that's not what happened. Varav kaved baretz. The famine continued to be very, very strong, and therefore there wasn't a whole lot going on agriculturally. When they finished eating all of the food that they had brought from their trip to Egypt, their father says to them again, go buy some more food. You went down to Egypt, it was great, you bought food, we ate it, now you got to go buy some more. So Yehuda answers him and says, wait a minute, no, we can't just go down. The person that we spoke about, we told you about this leader who says, no, you can't come down without this younger brother being with you. So now Yehuda says to his father, if you are ready to send our brother with us, Nerdo will go down, we'll go and buy you food. But if you're not going to send Binyamin, forget it, there's no way we're going. Because the man said, I don't want to see you without your brother. Yisrael says, why did you cause me evil by telling this guy you had another brother? So the answer, he asked us all kinds of questions about who we were, where we came from. Is your father still alive? Do you have other brothers? And we answered him. We didn't know we were we were going to end up having to be accused of spies and what have you. We told him everything he asked. We figured the more information we gave him, the less likely he was to continue maintaining that we were spies. We gave him all the information he asked for. How were we supposed to know? Yehuda says to his father that he was going to tell us to bring down Binyamin with us. So the interesting thing is, again, one of the interesting things about this story is the fact that suddenly we've switched to Yisrael, and that's why that's why in Pasuk Chet, which immediately follows it, it says, "Vayomer Yehuda al Yisrael Aviv." It's interesting that suddenly, instead of just being their father, he's now Yisrael. And if we go think about the different meanings of Yisrael versus Yaakov and how they are used by the Torah after Yaakov gets his second name, as opposed to with Avram and Avraham, where once Avraham is his new name, we don't see the old name being used. With Yaakov and Yisrael, we do see the names used almost interchangeably. And the Parshanim tell us that whenever we see Yisrael, it's referring to Yisrael, the progenitor, not just of 12 sons, but the progenitor of Am Yisrael, as opposed to Yaakov, where it's often referring to Yaakov either in his role as himself per se, or as the father of just the next generation, rather than the father of the nation. So perhaps the reason the Torah here is referring to Yaakov as Yisrael in these two interactions with Yehuda is because Yaakov or the Torah is telling us that this is where we are beginning the story, or really how Am Yisrael is going to become Am Yisrael. And that can only happen through the fulfillment of the Brit Ben HaMitarim. We have to go to Egypt in order to fulfill that. Or we have to go somewhere, and that somewhere is going to be Egypt. We have to again go into exile, even though Yaakov has already been through his own personal exile. Fact is, Am Yisrael is going to have to go through this exile, and this perhaps is why he is referred to suddenly as Yisrael instead of Yaakov. But again, the fact that there's this intervening period where they have now exhausted the food supply also contributes to Yaakov's willingness to say to Yehuda, okay. And that's exactly what happens here at the end. Vayomer Yisrael Avihem. Yisrael answers Yehuda at that point. It says, Im Kain, if that's the case, now that Yehuda has made this guarantee, he will take responsibility. Go take something with you, whatever we have left in the storerooms. And bring some type of gift to this man who's the food seller. And then he gives a list of things. And also, take double the amount of money, because who knows, the prices, the famine has been going on longer. Food prices have probably gone up. Not only do I want you to take double the amount of money you took last time, but the and also return the money, bring back the money that was returned by mistake to your sacks, because maybe it was a mistake in the processing. Somebody forgot to take the money out that was supposed to be removed at the end of the assembly line, and the guy who was doing it took a bathroom break and he forgot about your money and it slipped through and they got packed up and ready to go without taking your money out. So bring your original money back so that you shouldn't be accused of stealing that grain, and bring enough money to make sure you have enough to pay for whatever the inflated price of grain is now on the market. And take your brother with you. And go return before the man. And he gives them a tefillah. Hashem should give you, so the person should have mercy on you. And he should send your other brother, i.e. Shimon, back, and Binyamin. And I lost Yosef, I've lost Shimon, now I'm going to lose Binyamin. Maybe I'll get some of them back, maybe not, he doesn't know. And the story, by the way, of course, continues with them getting to Yosef and continuing, but I wanted to focus, as I said, on this part of the story and some of the lessons that we glean from it. So we're going to go and start now with some of the parshatim. Of course, Rashi is first. Rashi very interestingly says that when in the original beginning of the story, Yaakov asks them, he says, Redu Shama, go down to there to buy food, and Velo Amar Lechu, and it doesn't say Lechu, go there. Remez l'matayim v'eser shanim shenishtabu l'mitzrayim kiminyan Redu. Rashi says this is a hint to the fact that Bnei Yisrael, from the time they go down, not from this trip, but when they go down with everybody a little bit later, till they leave Egypt, at the Exodus is 210 years. That is alluded to by the fact that the word is redu, has a numerical value of 210. And as I said, here it says, Achei Yosef, when they first go, it calls them the brothers of Yosef. The Lokata B'nei Yaakov, it doesn't say the sons of Yaakov or the sons of Yisrael, as it says later on. Melamed Yehayu Mitchartim B'mechirato. This is to teach us, Rashi quotes the Medrash and says, the Torah is trying to tell us that they regretted having sold Yosef. They had decided that they were going to treat him in a brotherly fashion, believe Doto, and to redeem him. Any price, they were going to redeem him from whoever owned him for whatever price, if they found him in Egypt. Why was Yosef able to recognize the brothers? Because Yosef was 17. At age 17, the brothers were a little bit older than them. And they were already, 17 and up. So they all had beards already. So perhaps the fact they already had beards means he knew what they looked like with beards, was able to recognize them. They did not recognize him. When he was 17, I guess he didn't have such a bushy beard at age 17. And now he's the Egyptian ruler and he's got the full-grown beard. So the fact that he has his facial features have changed significantly with the beard, they were not able to recognize. That's what Rashi wants to say is the simple meaning of the recognition. We'll skip the midrashic one, okay? Now, when they get back, Yaakov says, "Lo yered b'ni imachem." I'm not sending him. Why? Because lo kibel devarav shel Reuven. Yaakov was not willing to accept Reuven's words. What did Reuven say? At Shnei Banai Tamit, you can have my two sons, and you can do whatever you want. Basically, you can kill them if you want. If I don't bring him home, Amar, he said to him, "Bechor shota, who's that? What kind of silly, crazy son do I have? Who Amar lamit banav? He wants me to kill his sons. They're not my children also." So clearly, he didn't understand He understood Reuven's offer as a literal offer, and therefore he completely and entirely dismisses it. Yehuda's advice to the brothers at that point was, we have to wait. He's not going to let Binyamin go. So Yehuda told him we have to wait till the food runs out. Once the food runs out, he'll have to change his mind. And that's exactly what happens, that they wait till the food runs out. Now Yehuda says, we will live v'lo namut. Why will we live? What does that mean? Rashi says, when he says we will live, it's a little prophecy. Al yidei halichazu, by us going to Egypt, your spirit will once again be completely revived, because by going to Egypt, ultimately, when they go back to Egypt and they find out who Yosef is, and Yaakov finds that Yosef is still alive, it says, Ruach Yaakov Aviyam, Yaakov's spirit again came back to life. Yaakov is reanimated by the awareness that Yosef is alive ultimately. But at this point, they didn't know that, so the fact that Yehuda uses the word v'nichyev v'lo namut, Rashi wants to say midrashically that that's a prophecy that through their going to Egypt, they would find out about Yosef, and Yaakov would be rejuvenated. V'lo namut, what does it mean we won't die? B'ra'av, famine. Yehuda's logic was fairly straightforward. Binyamin savik yitafesh, savik lo yitafesh. Binyamin has got to go with us. Look, every one of us, when we travel, any one of us at any point, there's a possibility something will happen. There's possibly something won't happen. However, it's guaranteed if we don't go buy more food, Yehuda says, we're all going to die from the famine. It is better that we should leave the doubt in place, that we should leave it alone, and we should grab on to the certain. It's certain that we can save ourselves by going and buying food. If something happens to Binyamin, there's nothing we can do about it. But if we know that if we don't do something for ourselves, for everybody, we're all going to die. So there's a certainty that we're all going to die versus a possibility that something could happen to Binyamin. We have to balance that certainty and try to avoid that versus the doubt. That's what Yehuda says. Now, similarly, he says, I will bring him back. Not only does Yehuda guarantee he will bring him back, but he guarantees he'll bring him back alive. He will do everything in his power to bring him back alive. Rashi says, what does that mean? I will send to you for all eternity, the olam haba, in the future world. So in other words, Yehuda is basically putting not just his physical life, but his spiritual life on the line that he will bring Binyamin back safe. All right. Sforno basically addresses why does the Torah mention twice that Yosef recognizes the brothers? And Sforno says very simply, Vayakireim, he recognized them the first time, Shehem Achav, that they were his brothers collectively. Lo shikir achad liachad. He still didn't know who was who. He recognized collectively that these were his brothers, but he hadn't yet figured out who was Reuven, who was Shimon, who was Levi, because presumably they all looked somewhat alike. How did he disguise himself? Shana ta'amo v'lo diber ba'anava k'min hagav. He changed his manner of speaking, and he didn't speak the way he normally spoke. So he spoke as though he was very angry, as though he was very haughty, so that they would not recognize that it was him. And he spoke kashod, he spoke harshly to them, penyakiruhu b'kol, because Yosef was very, very afraid that the brothers would recognize who he was. He was not ready to reveal himself at this point in time. And his first thought when he recognizes the brothers is that, wait a minute, if I recognize them, they recognize me. So he takes multiple steps to try to hide who he is. Ultimately, in the next pasuk, when it says Vayaker Yosef et Achav, he recognizes brothers. There it means Achad li Achad. There it means afterwards, ultimately, he recognizes each one individually who they are. It's the example like that. In the beginning, he recognized the collective, and later on, he recognizes each of the individual. Therefore, the Torah says he recognizes them twice. But again, he takes multiple steps to ensure, or at least the best he can, that they don't recognize him, because he is not ready to reveal himself at this point. The Parshanim have a whole discussion about why he's not ready to reveal himself. We've discussed that in prior years, so I don't want to get into that right now. Okay. Now, Sforno says, why was it that Yehuda is willing to take this commitment? Kilulate Mamanu, if you hadn't already delayed, we would have been back. Why? The reason Yehuda says to his father, I am willing to accept upon myself eternally, having sinned to you eternally, if I don't bring him back, I am fully convinced. In other words, if we hadn't waited all this interim while we were eating up all this extra supplies, we would have been able to go back and forth buying food all we wanted. What does that mean? This person who accused us of being spies, once we brought Binyamin back, he would have not held us back at all. He would have given us free reign in the country. Biyoto Yorei Elohim, because this man appeared to be, from his speech, from his manner, appeared to be a God-fearing man. And once we have proved the truth by bringing Binyamin, he's not going to hold us back. So Yehuda basically says to his father, I have no concern that we're going to be rearrested on this spy charge once Binyamin has arrived. Everything will go smoothly. We will be able to continue trading peacefully with this Egyptian, and it won't be a problem. Ramban, again, why did how was Yahus able to recognize his brothers? Miyad sharo tamachira. As I said, immediately recognized them. Upachad ulai yakiruhu. And Yosef is very much concerned that they are going to recognize him, and he is not yet ready to reveal himself. He pulled his headgear down a little bit further onto his forehead. The kitzad hapanim, and it covered part of his forehead. The shino atzmo, and he changed himself. In other words, he tried to disguise himself both physically and through his mannerisms. In other words, the word naker means to be disguised, and so that's what he's saying. Yosef, it doesn't mean naker means he hid himself from them, he disguised himself in front of them. Oh yeah, naker bekan. One way is that's one way. Naker lehem bidvarav. He disguised himself through his words. He spoke to them angrily, and he spoke to them harsh words. As if nobody had ever come before him to buy food, as though, what audacity have you to come to buy food before me? What do you want from me? And then they answer, once they told him where they were from, that they came from Eretz Canaan. That helped him convince him that they were truly his brothers. For that, he might have had a little doubt, but once they said they came from the land of Canaan, he knew that they were his brothers. This is why Ramban says that it mentions twice that he recognized them. Because each time, the more time they spent in front of him, the more convinced he was that they were his brothers. Rashi wrote, he acted as a stranger to them, to speak harshly to them. That Vitnaker is related to the word speaking like a stranger. That's not the intent of the word Vitnaker. Vitnaker, Ramban says, not like Rashi says it's to be an alien, it's to be disguised. The pasuk says that they did not recognize him klal at all, and therefore he had fully pulled the wool over their eyes. He no longer had to put up this mask of masquerading and trying to convince them that he wasn't himself. Okay. The Rashi Ramban brings down the same medrash that Rashi brings down, that about being bearded versus not being bearded. However, he has a problem with that. Yisachar and Zvulun were approximately the same age as Yosef. The difference is, since he recognized the older brothers from their beards, he was able to recognize the younger ones, even though they also didn't have beards when he left them. The Odayam Akiram, he also recognized them because he knew they were going to come there. The reason they didn't recognize him, it never crossed their mind to think it even possible that Yosef, who they had sold as a slave, had risen to a position of power in Egypt, and therefore they couldn't have recognized him because it was totally beyond the realm of their possibility. Whereas he knew that ultimately they would have to come down because the famine was so terrible, they'd ultimately have to come down. So the fact that when they arrived, it's almost as if he was expecting them. Although the Medrash goes a step further and says that Yosef required everybody to sign their name in at the gate when they came, and when he saw, when at the end of each period of time, when they brought all the names in front of him, and he saw all of his brothers' names, Reuven ben Yaakov, Shimon ben Yaakov, etc., he knew that they were in Egypt and they were eventually going to arrive in front of him because he was the only address for buying food. And that's specifically why, at least according to the Midrash, Yosef specifically set it up that he was in charge of all food purchases, because he wanted to make sure that when his brothers came to buy food, they could only go past him. They had to appear in front of him. Now, why he did that, as I said, that's a whole different story. What is Yosef's whole motivation in this whole story? That's a whole different question and a whole different drash. The question I wanted to address, really, as I said, is what was it about Yehuda that made him trustworthy, perhaps, in the eyes of Yaakov versus Reuven? So Ramban's theory is as follows. Even though Reuven says, "Et shnei banai tamit," that's not what he really means. He doesn't mean kill my two sons literally, according to Ramban. Kibel alav bi Allah alav alaviv. He basically accepts a curse upon himself if he doesn't bring Binyamin back to his father. Ki amar lo et shnei banai tamit yot anashcha alai im lo ashivenu elecha. I will be punished. In other words, there will be some punishment due to me if I can't bring Binyamin back. It's exactly very similar to what Yehuda says. I will have sinned to you all my days. In other words, I will be responsible for this till my dying day. I will never be able to forgive myself for this. So Ramban seems to say that Reuven and Yehuda were both basically telling Yaakov the same thing. However, Yaakov lo batach Reuven kasher batach Yehuda. Yaakov did not trust Reuven like he trusted Yehuda. Ki Yehuda gavar be'achiv, because Yehuda was the strongest of the brothers, or the one who ruled over the brothers. The Ode. Now, another reason he didn't want to trust Reuven, ki Reuven kvar pasha bi'aviv v'lo yiftach bo. Reuven had already sinned against his father, and therefore he did not trust him. V'haklal ki hoyta atzat Yehuda tova anichol zoken achicha pat min habayit. As the Medrash says, Yehuda's advice to wait rather than making harsh offers or any offers to Yaakov when they still had food was not a good idea. To wait till the food was out, and then he would have no choice. He would have to let Binyamin go. Once the food is out, he'll have to listen. And that's what Yehuda meant when he said "Anachnu and Tapenu," when all will survive. So I think one of the things that comes out of this story really is we see already the transfer. We saw it already at the beginnings of it, with the sale of Yosef, where Reuven makes a suggestion and Yehuda makes a suggestion, and ultimately it's Yehuda's suggestion that is carried out to remove Yosef from the family for a period of time. So we see already that Yehuda's generally looked up to by the brothers as the decision maker. And here we see it much more clearly, where Reuven is willing to take responsibility for Binyamin, and Yaakov says, no way. And when Yehuda makes the same offer, basically, obviously Yehuda couches it in more politically correct terms than Reuven does, as clearly from what Rashi says. Rashi says the fact isn't that Yaakov was characteristically adverse to letting Binyamin go. He did not trust Reuven with him, and he also didn't like Reuven's choice of words. Reuven did not present it in a meaningful way as Yehuda does later on. And I think that ability is among the abilities that is required for leadership, the ability to be able to make statements in ways that people can accept them, even those hard decisions that they don't want to make. Yaakov did not. Bottom line, Yaakov did not want to let Binyamin go. He is forced to it. He knows he's going to have to, but it's Yehuda's use of political persuasion that enables him to, again, to quote, save face. Yaakov, not that Yaakov needs to save face, but he does. He's not embarrassed by when he says, "Okay, Binyamin can go." He's not. It's not as though he's totally lost all of his composure. He has been, because Yehuda has come part way to meet him. That's the sign of a political leader, and that's why ultimately we find that the Malchut, the kingship of Bnei Yisrael, ultimately vest themselves in the tribe of Yehuda. As we see, of course, later on in the beginning of next week's parshat Vayigash, we see how Yehuda now has, having accepted this mission, carries out this mission. Because it's one thing to say, I'll take responsibility. It's quite another to do it. But we've already seen that with Yehuda, and we saw the beginning of that change last week with the story of Yehuda and Tamar. We see it here again with the story of Yehuda and Binyamin, and we see it again next week with Yehuda approaching Yosef on behalf of Binyamin. So clearly, these traits of leadership are beginning to show as Yehuda continues to mature as we go through the whole story, the whole saga of Yaakov's family and how they ended up in Egypt. And we hope and pray that Hashem should bless us with leaders who have the ability of Yehuda to make the right decisions and make them presentable, present them in a way that people will be willing to accept them and understand that they're necessary decisions to move not just the individuals forward, but to move the whole nation forward. And that Hashem should bless us with those kind of leaders and bless those leaders to make the right decisions so that we can move forward as Am Yisrael biyachad, and we can be zocha to success in all of our endeavors, and ultimately be zocha to teach the whole world about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and be zocha to Gula Shleim Heira V'Yameinu. Thank you all for joining. Questions, comments, feedback at this point? Anybody? Any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you all. I just wish you everybody a happy Hanukkah and Lila.